Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with me, Grant Gibson. As regular listeners are almost certainly aware, the idea behind the show is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Currently, I find myself in a bookbinder's studio in Crystal Palace, which is home to Laura Youngson Coll. Yet rather than books, the artist creates extraordinarily intricate sculptures made from leather, but also vellum, a calves or goat skin that historically has been used to write on. The Magna Carta, for example, was inscribed on vellum, as for centuries were the laws of this land. However, in Laura's hand, the material is transformed. Inspired by nature and science, her works frequently mix fact with fiction and manage to be at once beautiful and disconcerting. They are, in my view, quite brilliant. And seemingly I'm not alone. Laura won the Paris-Jouet Art Salon Prize in 2014, while in 2017 she exhibited at the prestigious Jerwood Makers Open and was shortlisted for the Woman's Hour Craft Prize. Laura, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Did I get that all right?
Yes,
oh,
that's all correct.
Good.
Even the Youngson Coll was pronounced properly. It's brilliant.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. In the first instance, can we talk a little bit about the space we're inhabiting?
Yeah. Sure.
Because it's a bookbinder's.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the kind of corner of this huge space.
Mm-hmm.
What goes on here and what do you do here?
Okay, so we do one-off bookbinding projects, but we also do a lot of furniture and interiors. So we make a lot of samples of what you can do with vellum or leather if you're covering furniture, or so we make effects which we give to the designers, and then they say, oh, we would like this furniture covered in this, or can you adapt this a bit? Or so it can be quite a creative process. That's sort of my day job. So that's what's surrounding us at the moment.
Right.
That all happens in this studio. And I'm really lucky to rent a space in the corner, which, because all my work's fairly small scale, I can expand into the rest of the room sometimes because my colleagues are very nice. I work on a desk in the corner, and it's really good for me to be able to move between the two, because the furniture work sort of sustains me. Unfortunately, I can't make an entire living out of my own work at the moment. Maybe one day, you never know. But it's good to be able to move between the two, and that gives me the opportunity to work on my own work and also do this freelance work and make some money.
Because you trained as a fine artist and a sculptor, initially at Duncan of Jordanston, before going on to the Royal College. So how do you end up working in a bookbinder's?
Completely by chance. So I think it was a colleague at a cafe I was working at when I was doing my MA, just as part-time work. And she one day said, oh, you're a sculptor. Would you like some pairing work? Because at the time we were doing a lot of huge panels. I think it was for a yacht, and there was a lot of very sort of intricate little bits on it, and they all needed pairing. Pairing
is what?
Pairing was, okay. So pairing is, we do it with a surgical scalpel, but traditionally done with a paring knife, and it's just thinning down the edge of the leather or the vellum until it's wafer thin, and it's traditionally used to make seamless joins. So if you think about running your finger over a blunt edge, you would get that blunt edge and you would feel that blunt edge, and it would be vulnerable to lifting. But the paired edge is thinned down to such sort of microscopic thinness that you can put the two paired joins together and create a sort of, it creates a visual boundary, but a physical sort of flatness.
Yeah. So I disturbed your flow. You're in a cafe. Somebody says they need somebody to pair things.
So, this woman did it part-time for Gavin, who owns Rook's Books, that we're currently in. And so I said, I wasn't that happy waitressing. So, some making to do as paid work was great. So she started to teach me that. I think maybe we approached Gavin. He said, if you want to try. And so she started to teach me. I think the first time she tried to teach me, I stabbed her with a scalpel. So, it wasn't...
Did she let you back in?
Yeah, she was still nice enough to... we could continue. And from there, pairing is extraordinary, especially with vellum, because it's such a fine material. And I just remember, leather is a bit easier. It's a bit more malleable and a bit more flexible. But vellum, yeah, it's quite, it's almost as rigid as paper. So you're trying to pare down this extremely, quite rigid surface. So it's very easy to get nicks in it. You do it on glass, so there's no resistance to the blade. But yeah, at first you're taking chunks out of it, basically.
Is that expensive? Presumably it's not ideal.
Well, it's not ideal. Luckily there's lots of scraps here to practice on. But yeah, on the actual pieces, if you were doing that a lot, then you wouldn't be able to use them. And, obviously, yeah, vellum is, the vellum that we use is a goat skin. It's very fine. The skins are quite small, probably, I don't know, 0.5 metre squared in the skin. And they're about 150 pounds each, so it's not a cheap material.
Yeah, you don't want to nick that.
So you didn't want to really mess up. Yeah, it's one of those things that it's just laborious sort of practice, which I find quite meditative. Actually, I quite enjoy that sometimes, just having that sort of mindless making.
So you're at the Royal College of Art on the fine art sculpture course, but you were working here where we are, Rook's Books, pairing vellum, not nicking it. And then, and Gavin offered me other work on the back of that. So I started sticking the vellum and kind of applying it, and And then there was a moment where you suddenly decided, actually, this material is the material I want to use in my work. Yeah,
that came much, much later.
Right.
Because my sculpture degree up in Dundee was fantastic. In the fourth year there especially, we just had so much space up there, and there's actually a lot going up there. I had Cathy Wilkes was one of my tutors, who was nominated for the Turner Prize a couple of years ago. So, and Graham Fagan, and loads of really good artists from Glasgow. And we were in this, I think it was an old factory or warehouse called Heathfield, and it had 24-hour access, so it's just a code on the door. And I think my studio was probably about the half of this space in the fourth year. Oh, this is a big space. I remember building a cave in it. So
you built a cave in your studio?
Cave in my studio.
What did your fellow students make of that?
Well, it was my space. It was
all
my
your space.
It was all my space.
Okay.
So yeah, it was. So it was just amazing, So yeah, in my fourth year, the whole thing came together really well. My degree show went really well, but I think I got quite a shock when I came down here. That was I initially moved down because my partner was starting his MA, and so I was a year in London just trying to find my feet and earn money and. Sort of reeling at the expense of it, and loneliness at first, I think. So I started my MA the year after. I think I was quite young. I mean, maybe I should have waited a bit. I don't kind of regret anything, because it's just it's life, isn't it? But and things things can happen unexpectedly, and that can work out really well. So, but I think I was a bit intimidated, actually.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we had Beth and Laura Wood in the series earlier, and she was saying something quite similar. Okay. The first year in particular, she found utterly terrifying, seemingly.
I mean, everyone's really, really good, and you're constantly told, this is the best institution in the country, or I do remember that speech at the beginning and thinking, we haven't quite made it yet. It's not a certainty that, just because you got on this, I mean, obviously it's an amazing opportunity, but so after my MA, I was getting shows and stuff and doing so. I don't think the work went so well, I don't think I utilised it so well, just because I was a bit.
Because what kind of things were you making? They're based on nature, weren't they? Because your work is still about nature, but even then,
yeah. So I was making a lot of I used to call them sort of dysfunctional ecosystems. I was making a lot of skeletal creatures, which were sort of indefinable. And they were, I made a lot of creatures they were sort of bipedal, so they could have been birds, but they had sort of slightly human element to them. I made them in I was thinking about this earlier, actually, in relation to material, because I reread an essay that Alistair Robertson wrote, because I had a show at the Northern Gallery of Contemporary Art. I think that was just after I was at the Royal College. Obviously, I wasn't using leather or vellum or at that point. But he was writing about the surface of these skeletons, and he was saying, it was just sculpey, which I'd sort of painted and glossed, but he was saying how, they were sort of viscous and black and kind of really weird surfaces which threw you because, bones are meant to be white. And he was saying the same things about, I made a lot of plant species, which I made up from different bits of plants. And he was saying, they're very waxy and artificial. And I was sort of thinking about the material link with that. Although I was using a lot of different materials then, and my work wasn't so based in materiality, it was still very intricate. And there was definitely those qualities that materials can bring were very important to the work. And it's sort of a link that obviously that's become more apparent in my current work. But
where the interest in nature, where did that come from?
So my mum was an environmental campaigner from the 70s, or, she set up one of the first sort of ecological cooperative shops way before it was mainstream, called Earth Care. And she was an environmental educator, and my dad he spends quite a lot of time in near Snowdonia in Wales. His friends have a house there, and it's in the valley surrounded by mountains, and he's been writing a nature diary of the place for about the last 10 years, and he spends a lot of time there on his own.
So he's an archaeologist?
He's an archaeologist,
right.
Yeah. So yeah, you call him up when he's been there for a while, and he starts talking about the goats and the ravens, and you're like, okay, Dad, I think you need to get back to civilization for a bit. But yeah, no, it's amazing, and he just has this amazing connection with, and so they've always taken me walking and out into the wilds, and sort of taught me the difference between the wild and the cultivated countryside, and but I think there was always an edge to it, because I was aware of my mum's environmental campaigning and very aware of that aspect of it, and our impact on that world, and our kind of how we sort of see ourselves as so separate from it. There's that sort of slightly dark side to it as well, because some of it's very destructive and I think I was always aware of that and that comes out in some of my work as kind of this sort of the artifice of our mimicry of nature, and
So were you making as a child?
I have a thing that my dad kept, and it's like it's a room, and it's probably 4 centimetres wide by about 2 centimetres, and it's it's a tiny little room. I've made it all out of paper, and it's a sofa and a shelf with a plant on it. It's absolutely minuscule, and I've just made this whole room out of paper and But I also remember it's a sort of really formative memory is my mum took me to Shetland when I was about 6, and I went to school there for a couple of months. She was on an archaeological dig up there, so I had to go to, it was in term time. So I was absolutely fascinated with, the amazing environment to be in, but I was absolutely fascinated with the Ziploc bags that they put the archaeological specimens in. And I remember I had this series of Ziploc bags filled with water, and then I completely destroyed all my felt tip pens by colouring the water with them. So I had these rainbow bags, and then I found a cowbird. I was really obviously into rainbows, and I painted rainbow and crabs, white crabs that had been bleached out. I painted. So yeah, it was kind of some interesting making going on.
But it's quite interesting, because there are some kind of fascinating contradictions. You're obviously fascinated by nature, and we talked about your background kind of in the wild, in nature, but this is quite an urban environment you work in.
Yeah.
So the desire to stay in London?
Yeah. It's bizarre. I never thought I'd be here for 18 years now, and I've built my life here. And I was possibly thinking about leaving a couple of years ago, but I was kind of relieved when I didn't. And it's just that, you build your life here and your friends are here and your network, and this is a great setup for my work. I don't want to be working alone somewhere.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I do crave the being out and about.
But also, you're a vegetarian who works in vellum.
Yep. That's the other.
This is interesting.
The other big irony of my life. I got addicted to vellum. As I told you, it was accidental that I started working here. Yeah, discovering this material that has since sort of just become so fascinating to me and so extraordinary, and has transformed my work in a way. So
well, it has, hasn't it? And so, I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but what are the key differences between vellum and leather? Because it seems to me the vellum has kind of taken more prominence in your work in recent years.
I just love it as a material. It's so fine. You compare it and make it translucent. It's very interesting sort of chromatically, because it comes in dyed in lots of vivid colours. You can sculpt it because you starch paste it and it becomes malleable, and you can
starch paste it. What is that?
So it's almost like a sort of archival wallpaper paste, but it's what we use so you work it into the vellum over a time of about, it depends how big the piece is, but maybe 20 minutes or so. So the vellum becomes saturated with it. So vellum, as it comes as a skin, is quite like rigid paper. But then when you starch paste it, it becomes malleable, so you can cast it around things or sculpt it. So I do a lot of that in my work, and slicing it very finely, onlaying tiny little bits, which become more translucent if you pair them. So you could onlay a paired bit of white vellum onto colour and kind of get the pattern of the hair follicles. So you can almost like paint with it.
I mean, you came to wider attention when you won the Perrier-Jouet Salon Prize, or award rather, in 2014, and subsequently followed that up by being in the Jerwood Makers Open in 2017. And it was here you showed some extraordinary emotional work that was based around the death of your partner Richard from non-Hodgkin lymphoma. I mean, that must have been incredibly difficult for all kinds of reasons, Laura.
It was, it was extraordinary how, I mean, we've talked about my previous work, and it's always been things that have been very important to me, but not about my personal life as such. So, that was a really interesting, and I think it was because it sort of came by stages. So I had this idea about making this work, and I was really, when those ideas form and you're thinking, but I couldn't put that out in the world. That's so personal. It's kind of, and then I had a weekend free because my daughter was at her grandparents', and I thought, right, I'm going to write this Jerwood proposal, and I managed to do that. And I think maybe to put it down on paper, that really, and it sounded okay on paper. It sounded, like this was something maybe I could do.
Can we talk a bit about it? Because there were 3 pieces, I think I'm right in saying. And what did those 3 pieces comprise of?
So the first one was, it was called pathogenesis, so it was like the beginning of the disease. So these were different pieces. One of them was just a very emotive response to, I mean, they're all based on biological systems and the cellular and the molecular and the kind of things that it's sort of my visual language is the small and the intricate. And so the cellular and molecular seemed like a good way to go. But also for a very specific reason, that you're given all these medical explanations when someone is ill, and you can't always process that. And there seemed to be a real, you can be given objective scientific information, but it somehow doesn't tally with someone's illness or someone's physical pain, or so I was really interested in that sort of somehow reconciling those two. And there was a real swing between being really interested in the objective biology of it, especially when I went to see the consultant that I worked with, the haematology consultant. And
so you had a haematology consultant involved in the project from the get-go.
I got in touch with him, and it was quite interesting seeing him, because obviously he could be very candid with me because it was after the event, so it's not the same experience as seeing the consultants were during Richard's illness. And so obviously it was something in the making process and the exploring of materiality that was going to tie the two together for me personally, because that's how I kind of assimilate things. That's, to make is very instinctual for me, to make, to understand. But I don't know how that translates to other people. That's the thing. It's kind of, it was very interesting to hear people's reactions to it. They seem people connected with it more when they were told of the very specific narrative of it. So it was kind of, the three pieces reflected the progression of the illness. Some of them were sort of cellular or molecular representations of that. There was a kind of medical narrative that went right through the three pieces. But there was also quite a lot of personal narrative, so I made material references to things that were personal between Richard and I. So actually, I used some materials that weren't vellum.
We used his medical cards.
Yeah, I used medical cards, and because I thought I could pair that in a similar way to vellum, and I used a bit of birch bark, so all sort of, and some platinum, as that was a reference to one of the drugs that he had to take. So there was all this kind of narratives woven through it on quite a lot of different levels, and that was really interesting, tying all that together.
Because I think you described it as a reconciliation between the microscopic, the scientific, and the emotional experience of what was actually happening to somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm. But obviously that's a very personal way of doing that, of assimilating that.
Did you find it cathartic?
It's so hard to say. I think I did. I think it's very hard to make some of it. But then, you're going through the grieving process anyway. So what part of that is just the grieving process, and what part is, I think it was good, and I really appreciated people's response to it and their sort of sensitivity about it, and and empathy, and
It was. I mean, it was an enormously moving piece of work. I mean, I'm kind of intrigued. It took you a year before you started. Was there a point where you turned and said, I can, well, A, make about this, but B, ultimately, if you're doing something like the Jerwood in a very public space, you're going to have to talk about it as well, like we're doing now, obviously.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was the thing when I actually got it. I sort of didn't finish that story. It was because you don't really necessarily expect to get these things, you know. It's kind of, and then I do remember the moment when I got the phone call saying you've got it. And that was like, okay, so now I really do have to do this in a public arena. It was very real all of a sudden, but luckily, it was well received.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, because sorry to dwell on this, but I'm just kind of intrigued because I've been on the Jerwood Makers panel. I've been a judge, and you have to pitch quite hard. I mean, it's quite a rigorous selection criteria. That must have been tricky when you're pitching something that's very personal in what is effectively a kind of competitive environment, I suppose. Yeah,
I think I was very aware that I didn't want them to think it was just sort of therapy.
Yeah.
Because I thought, I've got to sort of, I guess I was quite objective about it, because I was like, I've got to be quite professional about this, because, I can see how this could come across as someone's just like going to have a breakdown in the middle of it or something, or, it's kind of, using this as a sort of therapeutic tool, which I suppose you are to some extent, but you still got to make it and be professional about it at the same time. So, and that was probably good for me to do that, deal with it on that basis as well. A slight detachment, which is useful in some circumstances.
Yes, I'm sure.
But also the sort of compartmentalising, which is what you have to do when someone's ill. It's quite an interesting reflection of, otherwise you can't. You have to compartmentalise to some extent to just keep on going.
Because were you making while Richard was ill?
I was, I was quite busy because I was making so I'd had the Perret-Jouet the year before, and then Contemporary Applied Art asked me to make a piece for Collect. So that was around the time that he died. Yeah. So yeah. It was. I have no idea how how I did that. That period was kind of because our daughter was. She was 1.5 years when he died, so she was 8 months when he was diagnosed. So yeah, so it was a pretty crazy time. Yeah.
Because she's 6 now. Has she seen the pieces? Do they mean things to her?
No, she just takes it for granted that. I mean, she loves coming into the workshop, and she calls my sculptures boring now. She doesn't really remember him because she was so young. I mean, obviously, we talk about him in photos and sort of. But yeah, so which is fortunate in the way that it's not such a loss for her, because if it was to happen now, it would be devastating for her. But yeah, so she hasn't related my work to it yet. So I guess that maybe when she's older, I'll tell her about. I guess there'll be many more questions from her as well. So yeah,
I mean, a little like. Edmund Duval, who we've had on this series, those pieces were presented in a very particular kind of vitrine. The way that they're cased was very important to the presentation.
Yeah. And now I'm kind of thinking about going back to more sort of immersive environments, which I really did in my work before. But that was a very particular thing for that thing, because it was like the isolation of biotic systems, which is a very sort of scientific device. So you kind of isolate things in order to understand them, but then there's sort of no emotive kind of connection to that. And what I was talking about before about compartmentalizing and kind of, so there was lots of, that they were very important, the displays, and I wanted them to be very scientific and very clinical.
Yeah, they're very precise.
In contrast to because my making's so intricate and kind of it needs something to offset it, I think. I mean, on a visual level, quite apart from anything. But yeah, now I'm kind of, and everyone wants to put my work in boxes because I think it's so fragile, and I think so. Now I'm thinking more out of boxes.
And also in that work, and this is a thread that runs through a lot of your pieces, I think. Is there's this blurring that we talked about in the introduction of fact and fiction. Some of it is accurate, some of it isn't. What's your fascination with that?
I think it's to do with how you express what's in your imagination, really, and it fascinates me how the making process kind of transforms that. And yeah, I think that reflects the sort of ambiguity of these things, because it's aspects taken from life and it's aspects taken from imagination, and it sort of mimics how weird like human artifice can be, and how we're always creating these weird artificial things, and I'm fascinated by that. Slightly repelled by it sometimes, but also fascinated.
Because you do an awful lot of research for a lot of your projects. I mean, the lichen stuff that came before the Jerwood Makers Open. What was the interest in lichen? Where did that come from?
I've always loved lichen. It's just like one of those little details that's so fascinating, and it's so varied, and then finding out that it had such wider implications for the environment that it's very indicative of the environment that it grows in. And that was what the whole piece was about. So some of it thrives in very toxic environments, some of it thrives in very, very clean environments, and you can tell a lot about them. And I don't know, I just love that idea that if you look closely enough, and this little thing that's often overlooked, and obviously I'm fascinated by the beauty of that detail anyway, but yeah, I could tell you so much about a sort of on a bigger scale, I guess. Yeah.
And was the Jerwood difficult to follow up? I mean, it was such obviously emotive and personal project. I mean, for the Women's Hour Craft Prize, you elected to create pieces that took their cues from the 19th century biologist, I think I'm right in saying.
The Haeckel piece,
Haeckel, Ernst Haeckel. What was it about him that you found fascinating?
So the first piece in the Women's Hour Craft Prize I actually made previous to the Jerwood stuff. So the Women's Hour Craft Prize was sort of a narrative of pieces. So there was 2 pieces that I'd made previously, and then I made one new piece which was sort of
So Haeckel had been brewing for a while.
Yeah,
right.
And the second Haeckel that was there, because there was 3 pieces in that. So there was another piece that was based on Haeckel's drawings, but a lot of people confused that with a piece that I made, which was the first piece of the Jerwood, actually, to answer an earlier question, I did start making just after Richard died, but it was a very emotive kind of response. So it was like, I don't know if I even knew that's what it was at the time, but it was kind of my imaginings of a cancer cell. And this second Haeckel piece has been very confused, especially by people that know me quite well, with this first piece. So it was weird. There was like a dialogue between the two works. And the third piece was a sea squirt, which, because I was starting to look at the sort of medical technology in cancer and immunology and stuff, and this sea squirt, they found some substance in it that's very crucial in cancer medication, or they think is going to be very crucial in cancer. So it was kind of, so there was a dialogue between the Jerwood and the Women's Hour Craft Prize, actually, and it was kind of, and there was another piece that I made for Collect in 2018, and that was about immunotherapy and future therapies. And I think I proposed that for the Jerwood, but didn't do it in the end, because I thought it just wasn't right, because that wasn't the outcome, and it was like I wasn't at that stage yet. That's not what happened to Richard. That's not. So yeah, so that became a separate, a fourth piece in the Jerwood series, I guess. But yeah, and after that year, I was completely exhausted because I had the Jerwood and the Women's Hour Craft Prize, and I went to Tresor with the Crafts Council, and it was just, bonkers, brilliant, bonkers. And
you must have had to, with all these things, the Women's Hour Craft Prize, you're on Radio 4, you must have spent a year talking about a very difficult topic, I imagine. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it'd probably been a bit more difficult since, actually. It's very easy to distract yourself with external things, isn't it? So yeah, it's kind of... So more difficult now?
It's been quite quiet for my work again as well. I'm getting used to this roller coaster effect with the work. It seems since I restarted in about 2013, because I just thought, because I wasn't really making work for quite a long time after I left the Royal College. I tried for a bit, but...
Yeah, why was that? Because you talked about being burnt out by the Royal College.
Well, I was doing shows and stuff after the Royal College. I think it was just... I was just sick of sort of just scraping by, really. It was as simple as that. It was hard to survive, and I got steady work here, which was making. It wasn't, my own making, but it was still making, and it was a nice environment to work in. I think I just needed a bit of I had a salary for a few years, and and then, but I did get to the point where I was, I need to make my own work again, otherwise I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. It was really nice. And
so was there a moment, because you make, the pieces that you make come from scraps from this environment that you work in. Yeah. Was there a moment when you were looking at a load of scraps going, I can do something with this?
I think I started experimenting.
Right.
I made a few books, because you could learn how to make, but that wasn't really my thing. And I think there was always that in the background. And then Rich and I went travelling for about 9 months, and got back in 2010. And I think as soon as after that, I really started to think, I've got to get back to this.
I'm intrigued, was the form of the pieces you began to make, was that dictated by the material itself? These kind of tendrils that come off them, and the intricacy that you talked about.
And that's what I love about vellum. It's like it gives you that, or that material for me gives me that real feedback. So there's a real dialogue with the material, and we were talking earlier about making what's in your mind's eye, but that's always transformed in the making process. So, and I love that sort of interaction, that kind of, and the you don't want to just produce what's in your mind's eye. You want some feedback from the physical world, and so
I mean, in terms of your mind's eye, do you draw? Do you have a sense of how these things are going to start when you're making them, or is it all under the knife?
I mean, you can see these little maquettes that I started making. Oh, and actually these are, I just started playing with them on the wall, but they're, I have loads of these, so I sort of make instead of draw.
Right.
Make a sketch. in a way.
Yeah.
Some things work and some things don't.
And from that, and do they get bigger then? When you've made a maquette, do you say, right, this that's on a certain scale, I can scale this up? Or
they don't usually get bigger. They usually a lot of my work's constructed, actually. I mean, I do some casting to get particular forms, but yeah, they're I would say they're more constructed than sculpted.
I mean, it's quite interesting because unlike, well, not everybody, but some people we talk to on this podcast who commit to a material from a very young age, often ceramicists at school. You've come relatively late to vellum, but are you completely committed to it now? Is this something, could you ever imagine working in anything else?
Possibly, because I have before. I think for a good while, I still think there's a lot of scope in this material, and I'm still quite fascinated with it. So, and I quite like to explore the idea that it's actually skin. Because I'm
fascinated. How do you explore that?
I don't know yet. I don't know, because it's always there, and people have brought it up in interviews and stuff. Understandably, because you're quite apart from the vegetarian thing, there's and it became a bit more apparent with the Jerwood work, I think, because obviously that was cellular and very bodily, so it's kind of starting to emerge as I did a workshop in Bristol during the Women's Craft Prize, and I met a scientist who was specialising in skin ageing, I think. I really like to get back in touch. I kept in touch with her because I'd be interested to see how that would. And I enjoy that collaboration. That worked really well on the Jerwood.
So is this the future?
Could be, yeah. Yeah. As you can see, it's not a fully formed idea, but yeah, I'm interested as a boundary, maybe.
Very good, very good. Well, Laura, we've taken up loads of your time. Thank you very, very much.
All right, thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
So much.
And to learn more about Laura's work, go to laurayoungsoncoll.co.uk. There are images from the interviews as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. If you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this from. And go to my Patreon page and make a pledge. You can find that at patreon.com/Material Matters. You'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.